Okay, here we go. So we're right at the top of Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. Zok Hele Gemara. Loi Cholchen v'loi biyab. One of the things that you're not allowed to do, I think the Mishnah classified that as reshus, means there's a shtickle mitzvah in it. There's chalitza and yibum. In fact, Gemara, why shouldn't you be able to do that? Well, mitzvah ka'avid. Is that not a mitzvah? It's a mitzvah to do yibum. It's a mitzvah to do chalitza. So Gemara latricha de ika gadol. There's an older brother. Mitzvah begadol yabi. So if there's two brothers that have to do yibum, so a third brother died, and there's two surviving brothers. Out of the two brothers, the mitzvah is for the oldest brother to do the yibum, and therefore, the younger brother doesn't have such a mitzvah. V'chulu time of my. So all of these things, what is the reason for them? So we want to know the reason for why you can't make up saktin, why you can't do erison, why you can't do dushin, why you can't do chalitza. It's a more gzeir shema yichtayv. It's a gzeir that you might write. Shmuel, you're making Chasan's day. Wow, Shmuel, you're unbelievable. You're starting off the day with learning, which is simcha. It should be a day only bracha and simcha today.
The test isn't this morning; it's tomorrow morning.
Don't worry, Dave. I don't pay my bands overtime. It's cheaper package.
To respond to the package. Yeah. So Zok the Gemara, full time of my gzeir shema yichtayv. The reason why all these things are not allowed is because you're right, Mr. Weber. There was a little bit of a politic about what we should do, where we should go. So, could I ask you if you could sit in the Oitzer, because we were thrown out of the Oitzer because people are learning there. So that's really a good place to learn. Is in the Oitzer. Thank you very much. I apologize. Please seem upset.
You know, like Philip Finer wants to go back upstairs. We really should go back to where we belong. We should really belong upstairs and they finish. We're going concerned.
Okay, so let's see what happens. So Rashi actually goes through them all. It's the first skinny line in Rashi. Shema Yichtayv, Sakdin, the Yadim. We're afraid that you shouldn't pass it in the entire because you might write up Sakdin. Or start Erison the Kedushin, and if you do a Kedushin, you might write it down. Or start Chalitza l'Chaletes, Uksuba l'Yavama. So all of these things have documents involved with them, and we're afraid you're going to write those documents, which is a little bit interesting. And the reason why it's a little bit interesting is because normally we don't make zayers when the people involved are professionals. So who does the yibum? Like who's in charge? Who officiates? Isn't it usually like Rabbanim? So why would we be geyser for a Rav? But I'm not sure. Maybe
the biggest one.
I hear. Okay. Let's see what it says weiter. So Elu pain mishum mitzvah. What are the things that are real mitzvahs that are nevertheless prohibited because of the Isur D'Rabbanan to do them on Shabbos or Yom Tov? Is loy makdishin, you're not allowed to donate to hektish. Loy maricha, you're not allowed to donate to erchen for hektish. Loy machrima, you're not allowed to donate to cherem for hektish. Why can't you do those? So it's more gzeir mishum mekach hamemkar. It looks like mekach hamemkar, and Rashi says shum mekach hamemkar. Mekach hamemkar dam. It's similar to mekach hamemkar. Shemochi mershusoi v'shus hektish. You're taking something out of your domain, you're putting it into the domain of hektish, which is really what you're doing when you're selling. You're taking it out of your domain and putting it in somebody else's domain. Mekach hamemkar aser min hamikra. Mekach hamemkar is aser min haTorah. Doing your own things, doing things in your own benefit, which is business. That's not allowed. That's one reason why Rashi says business is not allowed. So it's like maruv is in the pasuk. Inami maybe mekach hamemkar asi lidei ksiva shtar mechira. Maybe the reason why mekach hamemkar is aser is because you might write a shtar mechira. But Tosha says that doesn't. But Rashi says that doesn't make sense. That would be the reason, because in Timer havila gzeira l'gzeira. You're not allowed to make a memker because you might write, and you're not allowed to do hektish because you might make a memker. That's gzeira l'gzeira. So you could say kulachad gzeira. When they answered make a memker, they expanded it to hektatious and all other things as well.
Yeah, like it though.
I'm sorry.
Like the U.S. budget.
Like the U.S. budget bill. What's very interesting is I don't recall seeing that very often. Is the top Tosfos repeats Rashi word for word. So I'm wondering why Tosfos would repeat Rashi word for word without making any comment. The only thing that I can think of is that Tosha said, Rashi, this isn't Mamish Pashim Shat, this is more Tosha's there. How dare you infringe on our domain? We're supposed to be elaborating more. Rashi is supposed to stick to the strictest shot. But you see how Tosha says word for word what Rashi says?
Rashi adds a little bit. I'm trying to see the places entirely, right?
And Rashi's even more lengthy.
It doesn't end with Chodesh Zero.
Yeah. Tosha says to the Chodesh Zero.
Right. So it's not exactly the same, but
It's interesting. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. The loy magbi trumas and should not be mafish trumas and
When they wrote it, first of all, they didn't know they would be the Taisvus. I don't know if that word, that designation.
But they knew Rashi wrote it.
Yes, they knew Rashi
Unless
wrote
Rashi wasn't proliferated yet. So they figured they have to.
That's right. He could have been in a whole different geographic area when he.
So they were advertising for
Rashi. Did he? I didn't catch it. Did he say? Is he quoting Rashi?
Tosha, if you look at Pirish Rashi, that's how Tosha starts.
Oh, he says he's quoting. So okay. So yeah,
so it could
he's
be
he's promoting Rashi Sefer.
Yeah.
It wasn't yet.
that's the problem.
What?
Yeah, but he's not commenting. He's not doing anything with the Sefer.
It's because Rashi wasn't Rashi. It was just a manuscript at that time. I don't even know how many people had it. He's quoting his grandfather's pshat or great grandfather's pshat on the
It's
Gemara.
Funny. He didn't say Pirish for countries.
The one time he agreed with them.
Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Pshita, it's pashit that you're not allowed to be mafish trumas and ma'asos on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Tanya Rabbi Yosef, loy nitzocha ela litnan lekoyin boy biyoyin. The chiddush is that even if you want to give it to the kohen that day, and Rashi says the ikal meimar lav muchacha milsahi ilasakuni tabla machavin. The problem of normally being mafish trumas and ma'asos because it looks like you're fixing your tevel. You're not allowed to fix things on Yom Tov and Shabbos. But this doesn't look like he's fixing it because as soon as he's mafish the trumas and ma'asos, he's delivering it straight to the kohen, straight to the Levi, and therefore the end you do it's very possible that when he's being mafish to truma, it's not because he needs the remaining chulin. He doesn't need it at all. He has plenty from before. And you see that right after he was mafish trumas and ma'asos, he took it straight to the kohen. So it looks like he wasn't even doing it to be masakin his players. He was just doing it to help out the kohen so that the kohen should have simcha shomtim. And therefore, maybe it doesn't look like you're being masakin. But the Gemara and Rashi says, it's still aser, and that's the chiddush. Zok to Gemara, the hanamili, harried it tefillah me'esm. That's only if the chiyuv to be mafish trumas and ma'asos were triggered before Shabbos, before Yom Tov. Avol period the tefillah ha'idna. But if the trigger to be mechayiv in trumas and ma'asos happened today on Yom Tov, how could that possibly occur? You're not allowed to do any malacha in the geir, and you're not allowed to prepare. You're not allowed to do the work on the products in the field. The teretz is you have it. You're going isa. You are allowed to make a dough. You're allowed to mix flour and water and make a dough. And when you mix flour and water to make a dough, that triggers a chiyuv challah. So avol peri the idna, they become first hevel today. Going isa. Mafreshin, you're allowed to be mafresh. Yavin l'kohen, you're allowed to give it to the kohen, like we had earlier. So you are allowed to be mafresh challah, which is like truma on Yom Tov. If you bring mafresh, it's from a dough, and the dough is prepared today. We actually had a shaila in the Gemara earlier. What if the dough was prepared yesterday, but you didn't mafresh challah yet till today? So there we had a shaila. But for sure, if you actually made the dough on Yom Tov, you're surely allowed to be mafresh challah. Zok to Gemara vayter. The honey, mishum shus ika, mishum shvus leka. The Mishnah, if you look at the Lashon Mishnah, the Mishnah says, Kol shachayim lo mishum shvus, mishum shus, mishum mitzvah. So mishum shvus, there's an isser, but mishum shus, it's not. Mishum shus is mashma that you're supposed to do it, but there's an isser, there's a prohibition to do it. So the Gemara is asking here, the honey mishum shus ika, mishum shvus leka. The ones that the Mishnah are identifying that there's reshus, meaning there's a little bit of a reason of mitzvah to do. Is there no isser there? V'hani mishum mitzvah, v'hani mishum mitzvah ika mishum shvus leka. The items that the Mishnah identified as a mitzvah, are you saying that there's no shvus? Of course there's a shvus. So what does the Mishnah mean to say? All the Mishnah is trying to do is build up the level of chiddush. It's pashut that if there's no mitzvah whatsoever involved in doing it, it's just an action of rishus, yet they're both prohibited it. For sure that's going to be yasser. Even if it's something that the Rabban prohibited, but it's going to involve a mitzvah, a little bit of a mitzvah, even there, the Rabbanan are putting their isser. And even if we know that if it's a slight Indian to do it, it's still usher. Even if it's an official mitzvah that you're doing, it still does not overrule the isser Rabbanan to do that action. So it's just building it up. It's not saying that the rishus and the mitzvah is not the shvus. It's saying the shvus applies even to a davar rishus, even to a davar mitzvah. Zot gemar vayter. Kol elu b'yom tevam. All of these isurim, the Mishnah says, are on Yom Tov. The kol shekain, they're on Shabbos. They're on Yom Tov and they're surely on Shabbos as well. Frank gemar ermini. We have a big problem because at the beginning of this Mishnah, or in last Mishnah, it says Mashil and Paris der charuba b'Yom Tov avaloi b'Shabbos. So here it says that there's something that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov that's not on Shabbos. So a minute ago you said, or in the later Mishnah that we just learned, it says in the Mishnah that there's no difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov; they're all the same. Yet the Mishnah immediately before that clearly gives us an example of a distinction between Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Rashi says, Mashil and Paris, Alma Gozu Shvus al Shabbos Shloi Gozu Yom Tov. You see, there's an Isser D'Rabbanan that applies on Shabbos that does not apply on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yosef Loi Kash, it's not fair. Harab Eliezer, Harab Yeshua. It's totally in the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. The Tanya we learn. We know that you're not allowed to shech a parent and a child in one day. And this parent and child fell into a bar. And we're afraid that they're going to die in the bar, so we need to get them out. But you're not allowed to stop to push animals around. If you're planning to eat them, you're allowed to take an animal out of a bar. So Rabbi Eliezer Eimer, Milas Harishon, Almanas L'Sheichtoi, B'Sheichtoi. One animal you can pick, you can take it out on Yom Tov because you want to eat it, and then you attack after Shechted. You have to eat it, you have to do what you intended. Vasheni, the remaining animal you may not remove from the bar, and it's going to be muksa, because you're not allowed to, you're not eating it, it's not designated for eating. Therefore, go into the bar, give the animal whatever possible things it needs to keep it healthy and alive until after Yom Tov, and then only after Yom Tov you're allowed to take it out. From Shuleimer, I have another plan. Let's say, look at that animal. I like that one. I'm going to take that animal. And you raise it up. And after you raise it up and you put it on the ground, you look at it and say, no, from this angle, it doesn't look so good. I think I want the other one. You don't shech it. And then you bring up the second one. And once they're both up, you can say, you know what? I think I like the first one better. And therefore you can say, Rotza zeh shochet, Rotza zeh shochet. So let's see how that relates. Let's see how that relates to our Mishnah. Dr. Rashi. Oizvus b'noi she'enan mutarin lishchot shnei mayot. So let's have a look. How Rabbi Eliezer, I meant the first Rashi. How Rabbi Eliezer, Sevi de Katani, ein bin Yom Tov l'Shabbos. Our Mishnah that we just learned that says there's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos. In other words, the Choshvus, the Gozra al Shabbos, Gozra al Yom Tov. Anything that they asr on Shabbos is equally asr Yom Tov. Va'afilu perhaps at moment, even if there's a loss of money, such as the case of the payers that are Meshilin, that's Rabbi Eliezer. So, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he would disagree with the case that we learned in the earlier Mishnah that on Yom Tov you're allowed to lower payers down off the roof to protect them from getting wet, because he holds even by Hefsed Mammon, there's no allowance even on Yom Tov. So he hit there lahalis oises benoi the Hefsed Mammon, as we just learned. Rabbi Eliezer did not allow you to take out both animals because of Hefsed Mammon. He said you'll have to leave one down there. And the Reish of our Mishnah that makes a distinction and says that there's a leniency on Yom Tov because of Hafsid Moment to protect your pairs. That'll go contrary to Yeshua, who holds that by Oisvis Benoy, you find a way to extract the second animal as well. So Zokta Baye, you can't bring me such a right. You're trying to say that the Machalekes Revelation of Yeshua is all about if we're going to waive the Isurim of Shvus on Yom Tov. It's pretty obvious that that's not the subject of their Machalekes. So Zokta Gemara, Amr Le Abaye, Mimai, why would you say that that's what their Machalekes is if you apply all of these Shvus into Yom Tov? Dilma, Atkan Loik Amr Rebbe Eliezer Hasam. The only reason why Rebbe Eliezer said that you don't save the animal, maybe Rebbe Eliezer holds you are Mekol by Yom Tov, if it's a hefsed. The reason why he didn't allow you to take out the second animal by Yosy B'Spanoi is because Ela the Efshir B'Panasa. You could sustain the animal without taking it out of the bar. So therefore, he wouldn't allow it. Aval Hacha. But maybe in our Mishnah of Mashilin, where if it rains on the parish, they're going to get ruined. There is no other option. Loy, he would agree. That's on one side. So you don't have a right that Rabbi Eliezer is machmer by Yom Tiv to apply the same shvusim. Maybe over there it wasn't necessary, but here it is. Inami, or you could say the opposite. Atkan lekam Rabbi Shua also. The only reason why Rabbi Shua was make over there and allowed the second animal to be extracted from the bar is ela the efshel le'arume, because you have a trick that you can do. You could make believe like you're doing it because you wanted to eat it. It's not so obvious in your face that you're doing it to save yourself money, to save yourself from damages. You could paint a narrative that you're actually doing it because you want to eat the best animal. When you're lowering pears down from the roof, how can it possibly be interpreted any other way than that you're putting it there to save yourself money? And Rashi is one of the proofs that makes it so obvious that you're putting it there only to save yourself money, is because the moment the sun comes out, you're going to put them back up, right? It's not like the animal that once it's up, it's up. So it's obvious that you can't make that trick. So maybe Rabbi Shua would be machmer by us. So our shaila here, our steer and our mishnayos, where either you do apply all the gzeres of Shabbos Yom Tov or not, is not relevant at all to the machlokes between Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Papa loy kasha. Let's say it's a different machlokes. Habe Shammai, Habe Sil. It's telling the machlokes by Shammai and Sil that we discussed earlier. There's a halacha. Mitoich shehuter havar l'tzorich huter shaloi l'tzorich. Basil holds once making a fire and cooking is making a fire is required for cooking. Now making a fire will be allowed. I don't mean moilidish. I mean lighting something on fire. Like you're not allowed to create a fire. But now that you're allowed to light up wood and kindle a fire because of oichal nefesh, it becomes mutter across the board. While Beishamai says no, you're only allowed to do it with oichal nefesh. You can't do it for any other reason. It's not we learned. Beishamai learned. Ein ma'tzion lo yes hakoton v'lo yes halulov v'lo yes sefer Torah l'shus harab. You're not allowed to do any of these isurim at all. You're not allowed to do these malachas of Beitzah. Beitzah matir, Beitzah holds you're allowed to, even though there's no oichal nefesh involved in these things, because Beitzah holds mitoich shehutra havar l'tzorich hutra nami shaloi l'tzorich. So zok to Gemara. So we would want to say the same thing. Let's look at this. Ein machinas hakoton. So I'm under Rashi. That's the fourth wide line Rashi. L'hutra tzorich shaloi l'tzorich. Beishamai holds that hoitzah shaloi l'tzorich was not allowed, only if it's directly related to cooking. The gabi tiltul shaloi l'tzorich nami gazrinan ba'afilu gabi hafsid mammon. And therefore, not only when it comes to hoitzah, but when it comes to muksa shaloi l'tzorich, we would also be gazer even by hafsid mammon. So that's why Beishamai would not agree to the Meshilin. But Beishamai would not agree that you're allowed to lower the pairs down to save them, because they're muksa, and we're not going to waive the issue of muksa, even if there's a hefsed mammon, because we're not matter any malacha shaloi l'tzorich oichal nefesh. So the Basil damri yitzah shaloi l'tzorich muteres, and Basil holds that they were matter all these surim, any of the prohibitions that you're allowed to do for oichal nefesh, you're allowed to do for any other purpose as well. So therefore, muteres v'natayir b'tiltul, therefore b'tiltul nami legos rabban. If they were matter a real malacha daraisa on Yom Tov, even shaloi l'tzorich, as long as it could be possibly used for oichal nefesh, so too there's no issue muksa. And if you remember, we learned Rashi said more than once, and Rashi says it here as well, is that the whole isser of muksa is only because of the isser itself. And the reason why everything's not usher to carry, everything's not muksa, is because how could you survive if everything was muksa? But the whole issue of muksa, Rashi told us, and Rashi tells us here as well, is linked to the Isra.
There's no mukta besides Torah, meaning there's no other lav on Shabbos that we're worried about except for Torah. What about the?
We are worried, but the Chazal determined that the reason why they wanted to ask for muksa is because that will lead to a risk of Eitzah, but it won't lead to another risk.
You won't lead to the risk of, let's say, lighting something or writing. Let's say a pen. A pen is mukta only because you might take it to Rosh Hashanah, not because you're going to write with it.
No,
Really?
according to that's what Rashi says. That's what Rashi says. But that's only one reason for the Shemuksa, right? There's other reasons for the Shemuksa as well, because then you could do physical work the whole day in your house and not rest, and you could get around Shabbos. Right? There are many different stories about Shemuksa.
That's only a little Moshe issue.
No. That's one of the reasons. One of the Rishonim. No, that's Rashi. That's what Rashi says. But there's a lot of Rishonim that explain the different reasons why Chazal made the Isra Muksa.
Rashi's reason is only because of Eitzah.
Correct.
So Eitzah is so risky, it's so dangerous, people would.
I guess because you could forget. You could forget. You have something in your pocket. You forget. Yeah.
The Shabbos, the whole Shabbos started to play so because it was such a problem.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point. That's why it starts off with Eitzah, because it's so easy to forget. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter.
Nobody's got a pen in their back pocket.
But it might be on their ear. It might be on their ear.
What, a feather?
No, a pencil on the ear. A pen on the ear, yeah. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So Gemara, Dilma maybe there's again no connection. Maybe again there is no connection between Machlek B'Shamay B'Sil and our Mishnah. And why is that? Beishamai didn't say this only Lagaba Hitzah. Aval Tiltal Loy. But maybe he didn't say that Lagaba Tiltal. Maybe Beishamai only answers Hitzah Shaloi L'Tzarech, but not Tiltal Shaloi L'Tzarech. Zok to Gemara, how could you say that? Otu Tiltal Lav Tzarech Hitzah. He didn't Tiltal all about Hitzah. So actually, then we have a Gemara that says it repairs. So let's see Rashi. Otu Tiltal Lav Tzarech Hitzah. Tchilas Hitzah Ayde Tiltal. So it's not saying what Rashi, that's why they answered it. What it's saying is it's impossible to be over Hitzah if you didn't move it first, right? Because before you could take it out, you have to take it. The Chol Mashagozu Einay El Mishum Hitzah. Rashi adds now that all of the exeris of Muksa that they made was only because of Hitzah. The Haidlai Gozu Al Tiltal Kalim Va'oichum. So Oibazoi, how about food? How about Kalim? You might carry that out as well. Why didn't they prohibit that as well? If everything was muksa, it wouldn't be much of an oinig yom tov. It wouldn't be much of an oinig Shabbos. Oh, it's actually an oinig Shabbos and a simcha yom tov. It wouldn't be much of that. So therefore, they couldn't. So one says after the Gemara. So let's just chaz it up. So Dilma maybe you don't have a raya from the Machlekes B'Shamay B'Sil. Maybe it has nothing to do with our Gemara. Because Ad Kan Lo Kamei B'Shamay Hashem El Hitzah. Beishamai was only concerned to aser Hitzah. But maybe he would allow Mashiv. Aval Tiltal Loy. But he wouldn't prohibit Tiltal. He's up to Gemara. Atu Tiltal Lav Torah. Tiltal is also part of the Eitzah. And he's answering that as well. So Beishamai answers it across the board. Okay, let's see the Hilek Gemara weiter. Habehema v'akelim karagli habayim. Now we know there's a halacha of Tchum and Sayan Shabbos Sayan Yom, which means if you're in a city, you only can go 2,000 amos radius around the city. If you're in the middle of nowhere, then you can only go 2,000 amos from your center point. Not only are you tethered to that center point, 2,000 amos, everything that you own also is tethered to that same area. So therefore, if you have a behemah, if you have kalim, the zone they're allowed to be in are only zones that you're allowed to be in. So what happens if hamoiser behem levnoi oileroi? What if on Yom Tov you give over your animal to a roya to watch or to your son to watch? Where are they allowed to take this animal to? Zok the Mishnah Ariel Karagli Abayim. It's still since before Yom Tov, going into Yom Tov, you had it. Therefore, the animal is still limited by the zone that the owner has. Kalim hamiyuchodim. What if there were brothers living in a house together, and there were clothing that It was one person's clothing. It was in his closet. It were only clothing that he wore. Hare elu kiraglo. They have the zone that he's in. But what if it was shared clothing that all the brothers shared together? Then hare elu kamokim shahach. Now, one guy could be to the east, one guy could be to the west, one guy could be to the north, one guy could be to the south. The beged is limited where it could go only to a place where all of their zones overlap. So if they're all in the same place, if they're kohen shvis in the same place, there's no problem. But if they're kohen shvis in different places, only in the area that their zones overlap, only in that small limited area are those kelim are allowed to be. Zokta Mr. Beitzah. I'm sorry?
Only the
Intersection. That's right.
So if somebody's out of town and the cable is here, you know, you take the cable out? Or is it
Out of the tchum? No.
out of their? Someone else. Somebody else take somebody. Great question.
So if I'm found out of the tchum of, so we're talking about I'm out of the city. I'm in a different city. Could someone use my clothing?
Yeah.
And use
Anyway, they're getting you for a foot.
the Shulchan Aruch speaks about it. I don't remember, but the Shulchan Aruch speaks about that.
All of your things are stuck.
Could be.
I don't think so.
No?
I think would not be practical. If you have two houses, one house and
So on Amud Beis, we're going to see why sometimes things aren't, even your own things aren't designated to
I
your
need you to
domain.
figure this out because my daughter in Israel will want to make sure that her sisters cannot use any of the things.
I hope they don't learn the me in your daughter's school.
Not in her. not in her.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara right here. Hashoyel klima chaver. So the Gemara is going to discuss a relevant issue. Hashoyel klima chaver. Hashoyel klima chaver. If one borrows a keli from his friend, me'erev yom, but he borrows it already from erev yom, so then it's karag hashoyel. Then it follows the person who borrows. So right off the bat, if you borrow it before, it's not a problem. If it wasn't prearranged, it's a different problem. But this right away, so Dr. Phillips was saying it wasn't practical. Right away, this mitigates a very big, because if someone calls you on Shabbos to ask you if you can borrow your coat, you're not going to answer the phone anyway, right? And if he asks you before Shabbos, so then it's already considered in the shoyel's domain, and therefore, and we're soon going to see, even if he didn't actually pick it up yet, but he made the arrangement to borrow it before, then it goes according to his domain. The Yom Tov, what if he only comes to you on Yom Tov and he wants to borrow something? Then, since coming into Ben Hashmoshes, the domain of this item was already tethered to the owner, it remains that way.
But if a guy answers that you can only borrow it on Shabbos, if that's the way it's requested, can I borrow your coat on Shabbos? And he answered, yeah, you can borrow it on Shabbos. Then he only technically becomes a shul on Shabbos.
So we're going to see. We're going to see what creates the sheila. That's a good point. V'chein ha'isha sheshol mechaver tetavul umelach umayim umelach lisasa. A woman's baking bread, and she realizes she needs spices, salt. So she goes to her neighbor on Yom Tov and says, "Can I borrow some salt? Can I borrow some water? Can I borrow some spices?" Now this bread could only go where they're each allowed to go, because part of the content of the dough belongs to her, and part of the content of the dough is kohen shvisa elsewhere. So because of that, where you can eat this bread is going to be limited. And this gets very sticky. That's what the Gemara is going to discuss. Rabbi Yehuda holds whoever provides water, that's not kohen shvisa, and the reason for it is, we'll see, is because when you mix water into a dough, you don't see that water anymore. If it was a liquidy soup, it would be a different story. But water mixed into a dough is not really there anymore.
Why is the first most expensive is not different than a show? What's
The Gemara is going to explain. As far as you're concerned, you're giving it from person A to person B. What's the difference if it's a show that you're giving to, or if it's a roy that you're giving to?
It's supposed to be the same distinction as an Erev Yom Tov or Yom Tov itself. I understand that, but it doesn't say that.
Why doesn't it mention the Erev Yom Tov Yom Tov? Because why is there no distinction? There is, and the Gemara is going to bring it up. So I'm happy you noticed it, because that's what the Gemara is going to drill down on.
Just to clarify, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, my Abraham Mamish is only water in regarding to baking, but not water just to borrow water.
Correct. Right, and even if it's in the Gemara can tell, even if it's in a watery tafshin. The law this Mishnah is not going to be consistent with Beitzah. Why? The Tanya, Beitzah said, if you buy a behema from your chaver from Erev Yom Tov, so you did the transaction Erev Yom Tov, but you didn't take delivery of the animal until Yom Tov. You'll say it's karagli halakech because it was already destined to go to him. And one who gives his animal over to a shepherd, even though he didn't give it over to the raya until Yom Tov had already started, harehi karagli raya. It is karagli raya. So that's a very big problem because it's the opposite of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says it's karagli raya. So Dr. Gemara, and this is what's going to open things up a lot. Afilu tamer abdoisa. You can even say that our Mishnah agrees to abdoisa. V'loy kasha. Kan b'roya echad. Kan b'shnei royim. Everybody always sent their animals to a roya. So if there's only one roya in the city, already before Shabbos, everybody knows it's going to be going to this roya. So let's see Rashi inside, and that makes everything beautiful. Kan b'roya echad. She'ein bir el roya echad. There's only one right. There's only one government that collects taxes, so you can't get a better deal anywhere else. It's a monopoly. Everybody gives their animal to this royal to watch. And therefore, he'll be kind of shvis. Bein moicher, bein lekeach, daitoi, shaloi tikna habehema shvisa etzloi el b'shvisa zeroya. Everybody wants the roya. The lakeach doesn't matter. Everybody wants the roya. That's ultimately who's taking care of it. So you see that the choshen mishpit bailim, the choshen mishpit ownership, is not directly linked to the kniya shvisa because I own the animal. Yet it's going to be kniya shvisa based on the roya because that's where I want my animal to be. So once again, you see that borrowing is not going to be such a problem anymore, right? If you know that that's going to happen. Our Mishnah is speaking where there's two shepherds in the city. So it's not a given that any individual roya is going to get it. You don't know which of the two royim the bailim want to give the animal to. Therefore, then in our Mishnah's case, where there's multiple royim in the city, unless it becomes clear who it's going to go to, it remains in the domain of the bailim. But if there's only one place it could go, meaning before Yom Tov, before Shabbos, we already know what's inevitably going to happen with this animal, then the tchum is going to be based on the recipient. I'm sorry? It's not a question of braver, because if there's only one, it was clear even before. If there's two, it's not clear. So therefore, it remains anchored to the original owner until it becomes clear that it changed.
Right, because it could be.
You know that it's going to go to one.
It's in the hand of the lawyer. So
during Yom Tov, it got to the right. But during Ben Shmoshes, it was still tethered to the owner. But you didn't.
It's a very strange Rashi.
You didn't make a decision.
Unless it's the guy's first animal that he's buying, then you don't know. But Melissa, we all go to the same.
You might have an account already.
We all go to the same air conditioning guy over and over and over again.
I don't understand. Don't you remember that it's akin to that to the Maril Diskin? Remember the lottery story?
Yeah.
It's just like that.
If you're drunk.
Right. When should I say it or legal?
Might as well.
When the Maril Diskin was a little boy, they had in his shul, they had a raffle for a menorah. So after somebody won the raffle, the Maril was going through the hat. Right, and he was playing with the tickets, and he saw that one guy, Shlomi, had two tickets. So he ran to the Gabbai, and he told the Gabbai, "We have to make the lottery over again because Shlomi had two tickets. It wasn't fair to everybody else, right? Everybody got one ticket, but Shlomi, you put his name in twice in the hat." So the Gabbai said, "No, it doesn't matter because Shlomi didn't win anyway. Right? It makes no difference." So the Maril said, "What are you talking about? Let's go to my dad. He's going to explain it to you." So they went to his father, right? The Maril's father was Binyamin Diskin. And the Maril explained to himself that now that we saw that Shlomi had two tickets, he had no chance of winning because he was going to be disqualified. So instead of having two chances, he had no chance to win.
Everybody else has no chance to win.
Right, so he had no chance. They have to make the raffle over again. So now, so had we had one roya, everything would have been fine. But now that we have two royas, you think it's better, we have no chance.
But I'll call upon, unless there's a designation during the Benish Moshes going into Yom Tov, unless there's a determination and designation, it always will stay tethered to the original. So let's see what the Gemara says. So kan b'roy echad kan b'shnei royim. They can, and I can actually prove mineu bay from the Mishnah that there's a choice and it's not clear. You see the Mishnah in its expression of the case speaks out that it could be here, it could be there. There were options. So since there were options, therefore it remains tethered to the original element. However, if it's clear where it's going, then there's not a problem. Shemamino. Halacha Reb Doisa. Halacha is like Reb Doisa, in fact, that we consider it already given over to the Roya, even though it wasn't given to him yet. In fact, more, did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that? Rabbi Yochanan said, Halacha Kistamish. We know Rabbi Yochanan has a general rule that we always pass like a Stamishna. What now we learn? Habehema va'kelim karagle habaylam. Behema and kelim is always karagle habaylam. So you see that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree with Rabbi Doisa. Correct the Gemara, weren't you listening? We already told you there's such a chiluk. So why would you ask such a kasha when obviously if you find a case where you say karagle habaylam, it must be speaking where there was two right. Two people borrowed a jacket. So two people borrowed someone's jacket. How could two people wear a jacket at the same time? If there's one's a teenager and one's an older person. So therefore, the older person needed it so he can go daven v'sikin in shul. And this guy, because he wanted to party late at night, he's not going to shul in the morning because he's partying late at night. So when you're going to be up, I'm not going to be up, so we can both use the jacket. And so Zok to Gemara, what happened? They were both using it for Yom Tov, and one of them made an Erev to the north, and one made an Erev to the south. So let's try to visualize what this was. So let's say that they were overlapped by 1,000 amas. So if you have an Erev, from the center point, you have 2,000 amas. From his end point, he has 2,000 amas. So if there were 3,000 amas apart, there's 1,000 amas in the middle where they overlap. But each one independently can go further. So the halacha is, the person who made the the north side, he can go as far north as Mr. Durham could go. He can go as far north as Mr. South. And the person who wanted to go to the south, he can go as far south as he can go as far south as the person who made the north area. The mitzvah at home. What if they were 4,000 ams apart? So there is no place where they can both stand. They can't budge their jacket. So you can wear the most beautiful Hugo Boss tuxedo, but you're not going anywhere. You can't go to the party. I'm sorry. Two people had either purchased a barrel of wine or an animal b'shutnis. Rav Omer chavis muteres ubehema asura. The barrel will be mutter. Each person can take his wine to where he's going, to his own home, to the entire range of his own home. But the behema would be asur. Shmuel Omer chavis nami asura. Shmuel says that neither item can be moved out of the range where they're both allowed to go. Microsoft effective one. Microsoft Rav. What does Rav hold? And this goes back to what the doctor said earlier, to bring Brera into it. Ika saber yesh Brera. If you hold yesh Brera, which means
back to the old guy and the bocher who shared a jacket. Why don't we say that he's borrowing and is now the owner of the jacket in the morning, and the other guy is the owner?
Because the jacket is kind of shvisa by shkia entering into Yom Tov, and it can only be kind of one shvisa.
And
whatever the zone is determined, entering into Yom Tov, that's the zone. Okay, so Zoktima, what is Rav hold? Equals over yesh prayer, which means that when we split the wine in the barrel, the wine that I'm taking is all for sure mine. And the wine that you're taking was all for sure yours. And my wine always belonged to me, and your wine always belonged to you. So if you hold like that, then I feel the whichever meat cuts that I take were always mine. Whichever meat cuts you take were always yours. So my meat cuts were kodesh visa in my area, and your meat cuts were kodesh visa in your area, right? Which is what you were saying, right?
I don't think the animal wants to be divided into still alive.
It's not asking the animal. Right. Very good point. Vika sover, Amber, and if Rav holds Amber, which means just because I have this gallon of wine, you have that gallon of wine, I might have some of yours, you might have some of mine, but we're agreeing to swap whatever's yours to me and vice versa. Well, then I feel chavis nami asur. So then how could I take my half of the jug of wine? Some of it might be yours. That's not allowed to go where I want to go. Let's say Rav holds yesh bear. So that explains why the wine is mutter. But what about the animal? The shanya behema, the kayanti tchumen mehadad. We hold yesh bear. So the wine that I took was always mine. It was always mine. And it was going to be where I was, and yours to you. The problem is when you split up meat, the animal was still alive when we split it, like the doctor said. And the animal was not happy with any of these two pshatim. But the animal was still alive at the time. So when we bought it, half the meat was mine, half the meat was yours. But a live animal, a living being, one aver impacts the other aver. They nourish from each other. So therefore, right. So therefore, even if I get the meat that was always intended to come to me, but there's some impact from the other side. So my meat has your tentacles in it because my meat was yoinik from your side, and vice versa. So therefore, it's not allowed. Amal Rav Kahana, Rav Basi Rav. So Rav Kahana and Rav Basi jumped on Rav, and he said, "I don't understand. The halacha is when we buy meat together, right? What I'm setting aside to eat for me is meat that I'm allowed to eat. I'm not allowed to eat meat that I wasn't planning to eat, that wasn't designated for me enough. That's muksa. I have to designate the animal, and your meat is designated to you. Now you don't say the whole shiloh here that we're discussing is a tchum, but stamazoi, if we buy meat together in the same city, you have no problem splitting it up. So frank the Gemara, they weren't worried about this in muksa. But you're afraid of it. Why are you chashish for this and not for that? If unique is a problem, it should be the same problem by muksa. There's some of your meat here, and I'm not allowed to use your meat. So let's see Rashi. Taishu doesn't like Rashi over here, but let's see what Rashi says. The second really wide line. Anan Sahadi, we know for sure. Each person has removed himself from the meat of his friend. He's focused on the meat that he's going to take for his family. If they wanted to eat it right here without an issue of tchum, you would never suggest to say that it's muksa. You can't split it. You can't have both. I don't understand. You never ate as a guest by your friend. So if your friend's meat is muksa to you, how could you ever eat by your friend?
Why would you eat? What's the basis of saying that it's muksa?
Because you're not allowed to use an animal that you weren't planning to use before Yom Tov. Right? You're only allowed to use meat that you were going to use.
Right.
So therefore, his meat is muksa to you.
You also want to eat it.
So it's not muksa to him. It's muksa to you. It's like two birds. If I designate one bird, I can eat that bird. I can't eat the other bird.
Now they say, gosh, how can you use somebody else?
That's right. So let's look at Tosis. Anan Sahadi, Rashi says the whole echad v'nayu actually died to Michel Kushukaber. Rashi is so poshut that when I'm splitting meat with you, I'm saying I'll never eat your meat. I'll never take your side. And therefore, and you would say, we don't say v'yesh kan muksa, but to take it to your tchum, if you have to be concerned about this unika, about the mixing from side to side, because you're afraid Tosis. My unique is muksa yeshkan. Whatever unique is muksa is here. Your friend's allowed to offer you food on Yom Tov, even if he didn't invite you before Yom Tov. But you're allowed to eat from your friend's food. You're allowed to send him meat. So if it's muksa to you, how can you send it to me? Mafresh ben Shmuel le'isur muksa. What does that mean? Shebehema godla u'maisifa shamnunus biyomtiv. We're talking about the extra animal that grew. The animal maybe grew a little bit on Yom Tov between when you bought it and when you shechted it. You're not answering that extra part that grew. And that extra part that grew definitely grew out of our both parts. So you're not going to answer even the extra meat, that would have grown. That you didn't answer, and this you're going to answer. So Tosfos massages it a little bit by saying it's referring to not the meat that we bought. No, because the stuff that grew, I'm not sure. Is it outside? Maybe it is outside. But yeah, you're right. It wasn't before. It grew now. It's not part of what we bought. We designate. I don't know if that's geschmack, but at least Tosfos Tosfos gives what is it? He justifies you here. He's standing with you, and he agrees that your kasha is a good kasha.
One thing we do know is that Rashi. One thing we do know is that Rashi said, according to the Mishnah, in his town it was shali shali, shaloch shaloch.
What's that?
If this animal had one owner on Yom Tov, you're allowed to shech, even though it grew on Yom Tov. So what is the idea that it grew on Yom Tov? What? Because there's no ownership of this piece that grew on Yom Tov?
This wasn't huksa to your achila at the time.
But even if you
Even if it's one, right? You allow that. Right, that's right. And if you allow him to eat that, even with one owner, you should allow two people who bought a behemoth together to
that it's allowed?
Yeah.
That's why you're not allowed to feed your animals.
Okay.
John.
Well, I'm just understanding it back.
So the Gemara backs out of it. So Zok the Gemara, Shasik Rav. Rav did not have an answer. It was a good question. Rav didn't respond. So my Havala, the Maisa, what happened? The Gemara, in fact, you don't split a chavis from Bema, they'll have exactly the same halacha. And according to Rav Hoshia, it would be mutter because you say breira. According to Beitzah, it would be Yosy. Correct the Gemara. This is all Gemara that we've learned before. The Sover Rav Hoshia yesh breira. I think that the Hoshia yesh breira. But now we learn hameis bebayis. If there's a mace in a home, and we know that the halacha is that if a mace is in the house, the door that we know it's going to go out of. Normally, the doorways of a home, the windows of a home, are not included as part of the oil. So the tumah that's in the home would not make any kalim that are in those doorways or windows tumah. However, the door that the mace is eventually going to be taken out of, the mace is not, unless you're making that home into a mausoleum, they're going to take the mace out of the house. The door that they take the mace out of, that doorway there's a halacha, I think, that door becomes tumah. What if there's multiple doors and it's not defined which door the mace is going to go out of? So what do you do with all these doors? So a mace buys for psachim harbe, and there's many doors. Kulam tameim. Any keli that's in any of those doorways will be tummy because they all have an equal chance of hosting the mace's exit. Niftach echad mehem. What if one gets opened up? So then it's clearly that's the door that they're going to use. Kutamei b'chulam tayr. What about chishav loyti b'echad mehem? You didn't actually open it, but in your mind you planned that I'm going to do that. Oy b'chaloy sheish b'arba arba, or through a window that has room to slide the mace out of. Then matzelas ala psachim kulam. Now it designates that this is the door, so all the other doors are not going to be coming. That only works is bahusha chishav alav at shelo yamas hameis. You only can designate with your machshava to make all the other doors not be susceptible to tumah is if before the mace died you did it. Once the mace died, you can't verbally or in your mind designate. You actually have to open one of the doors in order to stop them from being tumah. Even after the mace dies, you can designate. The Itmar Allah Amar Poishia, that don't think Beis Hill said that if I designate which door it's going to go out of, so Limafreya, all the kalim that were already coming in all those doorways, retroactively lose their tumah. Absolutely not. It's just letar es apsacha mikanu laba. So you clearly see mikanu laba in Limafreya loy. So you clearly see Hoshia doesn't hold the breira. Because if Hoshia holds the breira, once I decide which door it's going to go out of, it should also retroactively determine that that's the door it was always supposed to go out of. So you see that Rav Hoshia does not hold a breira. So okay, no problem. Epuch, Rav Hoshia, Ein breira, Rav Yechon, Yesh breira. Fact the more, now you want to blame Breira on Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan doesn't need to hold the Breira. Me, Israel, Rabbi Yochanan Breira? Does Rabbi Yochanan hold the Breira? Omer Basi, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Ha'achan shel cholpin. Achan that's split up in a state, Lukuchai say. They have the halacha Lukuchas, which means we don't say that what I had originally belonged to me and what you had really belonged to you. Rather, we don't know. So it's basically a swap. If I happen to have something that really came to you, I'm trading it for whatever you have that you gave to me. So therefore, since we have a din of Lukuchas, Umachsirin Zelas of Yovel, every Yovel, they're going to have to resplit. Can you imagine the lawyers are going to make a fortune? Every 50 years, the lawyers renew the agreement as to how to split up the Yerusha. When does Rabbi Yochanan not hold the Breira? That's b'dairaisa. By a deraisa, maybe Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold the Breira. So when it comes to splitting up Yerusha, we're talking about dinim deraisa. That's where he doesn't hold the Breira. But maybe by Rabbanan Islay, maybe by Rabbanan you would hold the Breira. So like the case of Chavis, which is a Shaila of Tumin, which is the Rabbanan, maybe there he would hold the Breira. Zakta Gemara, I'll show you with Rabbanan mi Islay. I'll show you that even by the Rabbanan, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold the Breira. So you're trying to blame Breira on Rabbi Yochanan. I'm going to show you that even Breira, even by the Rabbanan, there's no Breira. Because Vatani Ayo, the Tana whose name was Ayo, said, Rabbi Yudahimer, Ein Adam Masna al Shnei Dvarim Ke'echad, Ella, in Bachach and Mizrach, Mizrach, Umar, Umar. What if I know that there's a roof coming, and I don't know if he's going to be coming to the east or coming to the west. And if he's coming to the west, I want to have an Erev Tchumen to be able to get to the west from where he's going to be, or the right. So I can place an Erev on each side, and I can say, if the roof comes to the east, then I want my Erev to the east to work. And if the roof comes to the west, I want my Erev to the west to work. But I can't say that if a roof comes on both sides, I'll decide tomorrow which roof I want to go here speak. That you can't say. And we asked the question, because you're picking which way you want. We have no idea if the rov's going to come. So totally in the rov's decision later on, which also is not predetermined. But Rabbi Yochanan and the Kfar Bar Chacham, Rabbi Yochanan said no. The case where he says Lemizrach Hamayr is good is that Chacham came already now. Lemizrach Hamayr. He just doesn't know, didn't get the information where the Chacham is. He'll get it later. So he's making the Erev time. If the Chacham is here now, I want the Erev here now. And if the Chacham is there now, I want the Erev there now. That's not Breira, that's a regular tonight. Because that's already pre-clarified before Yom Tov. Alma less than Rabbi Yochanan Breira. You see, Rabbi Yochanan does not hold the Breira. So then you know what? We have to flip it back. We have to Rabbi Yochanan does not hold the Breira. And then we have to Rabbi Hoshia holds Breira. But the problem is Rabbi Hoshia so we proved that Rabbi Hoshia does not hold the Breira from the case of the mace. The Chilas of Rabbi Hoshia Breira, that's the Deraisa. Only by Deraisa doesn't hold the Breira. Like the Tumas mace. There's a Deraisa. Because that Tumas is a Deraisa. Abu Bud Rabbanon, but when it comes to the Chumen Islay, he holds a Breira. Tarshma Zutra Allah Rabbi Hoshia, the Pastor Rabbi Hoshia, that there's Breira by the Rabbanon, not by Deraisa. Amar Shmuel said we should have two answers to that. Shor shall patent. If you have a shor that belongs to someone who patents things up, Hareyu Karagli Kal Adam. It's like everybody, because a patent is known from far and wide, and he has a mind already before a Shabbos, before Yom Tov, that this is not Kohen Shvisa where I am. Whoever's going to buy it, that's the Shvisa it's going to have. But a shor shal roya, Hareyu Karagli Aishair, a roya who normally only sells to people in the city, he can open it up to the city. So once again, referring to She'ela, you clearly see that this is not totally Choshen Mishpat. Since I'm a merchant and people come to me from far and wide, I could, in my mind, say it's not going to streets where I am. I don't know who's going to buy it. Someone's going to come tomorrow and buy it. But whoever comes tomorrow and buys it, it's going to be based on where he is. So you see clearly it's not totally in the Choshen Mishpat who actually owns it. Okay, so let's stop here.